welcoming Dr. Ellie Zarabian, host of From Chaos to Connection, Growing from Pain Toward Community. Are you ready to make the most of your challenges while moving ahead with your dreams? Do you want your spiritual growth to be part of your healing while living your life with purpose? On Chaos to Connection, you will find resources to transform your difficulties into connections with others. Change is achievable. Dr. Ellie helps you make change both within and in the world. Learn to heal past traumas, become more self-assured, and take action in the world. No matter your spiritual background or cultural heritage, we will work together to transform pain and trauma to community and well-being. You can make this world a better place, starting with yourself. From Chaos to Connection starts now.
Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Ellie Zarabian, and this is my show, From Chaos to Connection. If you're interested in the topic of personal growth and building better relationships at home and in the world, you're definitely in the right place. My podcast today is about awakening to a time of renewal, healing, and growth in life and as a community. These days, when you look around you and you witness the condition that our world is in, I'm sure you would agree that it's pretty disheartening to see how much pain and suffering exists around us. We don't have to go very far from our own life to see all the chaos and discord going on. We also don't have to go very far from our own communities or political and religious institutions to see all the chaos and disorder going on there either. That's why I thought this would be a good topic for discussion. Given all that's going on, I think we could all benefit from a renewal or a reboot for our internal system. After all, we should be able to turn to our elders, community, religious and political leaders for help and support during such turbulent times. But when those resources can't offer the right help or solutions for the times, then we have to turn elsewhere for help. Often, turning to one's faith during times of turmoil and confusion can be of great support and comfort. But when we are struggling with our faith and even question faith in general, then we are left to fend for ourselves, and that can become an overwhelming task. In my work as a counselor, educator, and healer, I work with many people who have undergone or are undergoing such an upheaval around their faith. Regardless of the religious tradition they come from, what these individuals have in common is that they practically woke up one day and asked themselves, what's the meaning of my life? Why do I work so hard? And is there a purpose to my life? Essentially, they come to a place within themselves where they question everything about their life, including their faith. We call these big questions in life existential questions, and this state as an existential crisis. It's a form of crisis that shows up in various forms, typically during the second half of life. Sometimes we refer to it as a midlife crisis. Such a state of mind brings everything to a stop. It makes us look at ourselves and our life closely, and it makes us question everything about our reality. Such a state is not for the weak of heart. In fact, many giants and from all cultures have undergone such a state. Although we call it a crisis, there is a particular profoundness and beauty to it. The crisis is actually the turning point for an individual to embark on a more mature path in life towards greater understanding, wisdom, compassion, and empathy. One that offers an opportunity to redo life from a very different and often life-changing place. That's because up until that time of the crisis, most of us have been conditioned to live a life according to our cultural, religious, ethnic, and gender norms and values. That's perfectly fine because those norms and values teach us to follow the straight and narrow path in life. which is meant to promise a lot of good for the individual as well as the community. For example, we're often conditioned to go to school, get an education, get a job, get married, settle down, have kids, raise kids, buy a house, and invest in our future and old age. These are not bad values. They offer a lot of promise, right? But what happens is that for some people, the straight and narrow path ends up falling short for them because they either didn't end up accumulating what society promised them, even though they worked hard at it, or they did achieve those goals, but ended up not feeling totally fulfilled and satisfied in their life. Going through an existential crisis can be a scary process, especially if you're alone with what's happening to you and you don't think anyone around you can understand what's taking place for you. In fact, some people even think they're losing their mind and that they will end up afflicted somewhere in a mental hospital. Others try to go back to their youth and relive some of the experiences that they missed out on, hoping that by doing that, they will shift the emptiness they are feeling inside. People have different experiences, but the gist of it is a shift in the way they see themselves and their life. But those individuals who end up handling such a crisis with the right attitude and support ultimately end up in a much better place in life. A big part of my work as a healer and a counselor is to help people through such a state. People who have gone through or are undergoing through an existential awakening or crisis need a special kind of attention so that they can eventually find their way back to a life that would be more meaningful and satisfying. The period when an individual is going through this awakening can be a dark and lonely place. That's why we refer to it as the dark night of the soul. This is where literally everything inside turns dark. You enter into an inner void and question everything about your life. Such an experience is something akin to a small death. In fact, it is the death of the ego. And it can be a very disorienting experience if you don't understand what's happening to you. But when people have a bigger and more in-depth understanding of what is an existential crisis or a spiritual awakening, they realize that this is actually a very powerful place where the soul has a chance to reboot and regenerate itself, creating the opportunity for renewal, healing, and growth. I like to compare this state of mind with climbing Mount Everest. Imagine you have lived in the city all your life, and all of a sudden, one morning, you wake up and literally find yourself standing at the foot of Mount Everest. You wake up in this new place, and you realize you can't go back or return to the place you were living before. You can't go back. You can't go around. You can't go through this mighty mountain. So what do? You either give up on yourself and your life, or you find the inner strength and resolve to climb. The difference between someone who has prepared for such an adventure versus someone who hasn't is seen in the way they persevere and take the opportunity to climb up so that they can get to the other side. The one who is more prepared, the better their chance of climbing and the greater their chance for success at coming down the other side. Versus one who gives up before even trying or gets lost along the way and loses their footing halfway. That's why this path is not for the weak at heart. To have the perseverance to keep going and climbing even when you can't see what's in front of you really tests your faith in yourself and in your beliefs. I don't want to make this sound too melodramatic, but I know that those of you who have undergone or are currently going through such an experience understand exactly what I'm talking about. Going through an existential crisis is a life-changing experience. And if you learn to manage it with care and diligence, it can offer you the opportunity for an incredibly rewarding and meaningful life. In many Eastern and indigenous traditions, such a state is well recognized and understood. Many of these ancient spiritual traditions have provisions put in place to handle such a state in people dating back to centuries ago. Also, in such traditions, experienced practitioners, healers, and teachers impart their knowledge, their prayers, potions, poses, and practices, as well as rituals that help people walk through this path of fire with care, consideration, support, and love. But here in the West, unfortunately, we don't have such provisions put in place for people who are going through a spiritual awakening. And that can be a very difficult experience for an individual who has to work, make money, maybe even support a family and still remain engaged with society. Even more disconcerting is when people who may be going through such a crisis are misdiagnosed as being mentally ill and may be inappropriately treated and even given prescription drugs, which can create additional complications. Given all that's going on in the world, it will not be a surprise for many counselors to start seeing people who are undergoing an existential crisis and or a spiritual awakening or an emergency. With all the pressures around us and with little help and support from the community, people's mental and emotional health and well-being is being greatly challenged. That's why it's important to have a basic understanding of your own mental health and to have some idea how to manage your own wellness if you are in fact undergoing such a state. But remember, the positive side of going through the dark night of the soul is that you can come through it even stronger, healthier, more resilient, and even wiser than the person you were before having undergone such an experience. Many of the individuals I work with who are going through an existential awakening develop a new relationship to themselves, to others, and to their life in general. They develop a renewed sense of hope and connection with their faith that is much, much deeper and healthier than before. They end up healing many of their past wounds while redeeming themselves from a mundane and even meaningless life of materialism and superficiality. Instead, they find a connection to inner and outer resources that they did not have access to before, and they become inspired to accomplish goals that they did not think was possible before. After having gone through such an experience of growth and maturity, people find themselves on a path towards self-actualization. If you remember in my previous podcasts, I had talked about becoming a self-actualized human being. I mentioned that a self-actualized person is one who approaches problems, difficulties, and needs in life with acceptance, wisdom, and understanding. I also gave examples of such people in our history who have attained self-mastery or self-actualization. People including, but not limited to, individuals like the prophets, as well as people like Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, and Mother Teresa. In other words, when people go through a spiritual awakening as a result of an existential crisis, they have the potential to live as a more self-actualized human being. And who doesn't benefit from that? Okay, let's take a short break here. And when we return, I will give you an example of a person I worked with who was going through an existential crisis and discuss how he was able to work through it successfully. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Dr. Ellie, and in this episode, I'm talking about awakening to a time of renewal, healing, and growth of the soul. In the first half of my podcast, I talked about how some of the challenges people are facing in life are creating a state referred to as an existential crisis, a state where you literally wake up one morning and question everything about your life and your reality, including your faith. This can be a scary experience if you don't understand what's happening to you. But let me give you an example of a client I worked with who came through this process quite successfully. I had a client who came to see me about 9 years ago. And when he first came in to see me, he was very unhappy and hopeless about his life. He was in his mid-30s at the time, single and in poor physical health. As a young man, he had been quite reckless and had spent much of his youth indulging in all the vices like drugs, sex, alcohol, gambling, etc. But since then, he had found a path to a more conventional life and had put away the drugs, the women, and the drinking, and instead taken on a path to recovery through meditation, yoga, and spirituality. Along the way, as he got his life back in order, he ended up going through an existential crisis. He practically woke up one morning and asked himself those big questions. Is this what my life is all about? And is this all it has to offer me? And he was devastated and heartbroken. He gave up all the fun stuff and got on the road to a more healthy lifestyle, only to find himself at a dead end with his life. This realization made him sink into a dark and depressive state, and no matter how much he meditated or did yoga or read spiritual books, the empty feeling inside did not subside. In fact, the void seemed to get bigger. But thankfully, he reached out just in time for help and started the rigorous work of going through a spiritual awakening in order to generate a renewed sense of connection to his soul and to his life. During a period of several years, we worked together to examine his entire life, including his upbringing, his cultural and religious roots, his family values, his conditioning as a man in this culture, and his connection or lack thereof to anything meaningful and or sustainable in his life. It was a long road, but one that gradually offered him meaning, purpose, and motivation towards something greater than himself and his basic needs. Through this process, he realized that while he was not interested in conventional religion, he was in fact deeply spiritual, and as a child had a close connection to Mother Mary. His years of growing up in a strict Catholic home had taught him about focus and discipline, which he later used in his second half of life to cultivate a deeper and more meaningful connection to his spiritual roots, but from the inside out. This newfound awareness allowed him to recreate his own connection with the divine, a connection that was born organically from the inside out and one that offered him more meaning and purpose. This was a very different approach from his formal Catholic upbringing. His gradual work on himself led to a renewal of his faith in a way that promoted his own healing and growth from the inside out, and he found this to be deeply meaningful and rewarding. Finally, his renewed sense of hope and faith in himself and his path made him realize that he wants to, in fact, pursue a deeper connection to his spiritual faith and help others in their process. He eventually quit his day job and turned his work towards humanitarian causes. This is an example of turning something that is potentially devastating into a win-win situation when handled appropriately and with great care. Given that so many people may end up going through a spiritual awakening regardless of their religious background or faith or nationality or culture, it becomes important that we as a global community find a way back to our source in order to renew our connection in a way that is life-promoting and life-sustaining. I believe this can also contribute to creating more peace in the world. If more people return to their roots and recreate a more sustainable relationship with their faith by doing the required inner work, the likelihood of finding more common grounds increases amongst us. So, for your homework this week, I would like for you to take some time to do some self-reflection in your own life. Remember, this is just for you. No one else is going to see your notes. So in your journal, I want you to answer these questions. Do you think you have or may be experiencing an existential awakening or crisis right now? What has been your experience of it? Please describe it in detail. Write down your reflections in your journal because it's important that you begin to manage yourself with care and attention. If you haven't experienced an awakening yourself, do you know of anyone who has? How would you recognize the signs in someone else? You see, because so many people go through this process alone, it becomes important that we start to pay attention to people around us and notice if they're going through an awakening. And finally, what are your fears about either going through an existential awakening or crisis in yourself or watching it happen in someone else? Feel free to contact me if you have any questions or concerns regarding this area. This concludes our 8th episode on awakening to a time of renewal, healing, and growth. I'm Dr. Elise Arabian, and this is the Transformation Network from Chaos to Connection. Be sure to tune in next time for our next episode. Take good care and see you soon.
You have been listening to Dr. Elise Arabian, host of From Chaos to Connection. Tune in every second and fourth Monday at 2 p.m. Pacific on TransformationTalkRadio.com for more resources and tools to help with healing on your journey of life. You can impact the globe in the most powerful way possible. Whatever your spiritual background and cultural heritage is, you can transform pain and trauma into building community and connection. Join Dr. Ellie in identifying what you need to heal within and in our world. For more information, visit centeronpeace.com. That's centeronpeace.com.